quick note. My dog hated Sigur Rós. Playing it through the subwoofer with all those like deep synths and stuff, he was just like, what? He was not feeling it.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tastes Like Music. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here coming at you with an album ranking. This week we are covering Sigur Rós, Icelandic post-rock, maybe the first post-rock band we've covered. Not the first Icelandic artist. We've covered Björk, but the first non-English band. Most of Björk's music is in English. Not the case here. Go easy on us on these pronunciations. They are going to be a mess. We'll just say that up front. We've got 8 albums to rank. And you guys familiar with Sigur Rós going into this, or is this all new listens for you guys?
100% new. And I've never heard a single second of a Sigur Rós song.
I knew songs. I knew a couple album titles. That's it. I don't think I've ever listened to a whole album. I may have when I thought it was really cool to like them and talk about them at parties in like 2005, but I don't remember it, to be honest.
I know for sure I've heard a couple of them thrown on at the store when I was working, but that's about the extent of it. Never really bought any other stuff or took it with me in the car or anything like that. Just heard a few of them, but never really dove into them deeply. So yeah, pretty new for me as well. Shall we get into it? Who wants to start?
I'll start this one. Okay. I think at the bottom, I think most people will agree, Vaughn is the worst album that they have. And it is just full of ambient suckiness for the most part. 72 minutes of this. And it is, God, an interminable lesson. But you can see like hints of what they'll do later in like Hunjord. It's got like all that screaming and it's a little cathartic. It's not nearly as smooth or as pretty as their later stuff. It's a little grittier, which I don't mind. The only song on here that's like an actual song is actually quite good. Merker, a big icy cinematic. Sounds like the soundtrack to some fantasy or something. And even the guitar tone I love. It reminds me a lot of the Cocteau Twins, actually. And the vocals are not shrill. They're not annoying. They're not precious. And they sound nothing like they will on all the other albums. So that's also a plus. But then it goes right back to that like spacey, noodly, just ambient. Reminds me of like Amagama, just like crickets. And did not enjoy much more of it past Merker and maybe one other track on here. So it's a 1.5 star effort for me for Vaughn. The cover also reminds me of like a creepy Teletubbies kind of thing going on, and I do not like it.
Not only is this going to be difficult to pronounce, but it's going to be hard to recollect because Spellcheck did a fucking deal on my notes here. I also put Mirkur as one of the highlights on the album, but it auto corrected to the REM album Murmur, which is not anything to do with Vaughn. It is my number 8. I've got it at 2 stars. I think it's a poor album. Joe's right. You get some of the roots of what they'll do later, and it is a little bit grimier, but like I don't even think for 1997 it sounds all that good. There's not a lot of like ambient experimental stuff to really compare it to, but I feel like it should sound better, or at least it will much more later. But I mean, it just has nothing to offer. Nothing happens on this album. If you get through the first 10 seconds of a track, you've got through the whole thing and you just got to wait it out. It almost has no instance of popular musicality to it. There are some very gorgeous moments, like in Dogun, female vocals. It's haunting, it's captivating. I don't even think it was actually female vocals, just his pitch is really high. But it's a building block for better stuff coming. It's probably very influential. But to me, for an album, enjoyable, no. Impressive, no. Meaningful, not really. It's too dull. Hun Jord is cool. I like when it gets a little heavy, but there's just no focus on the album. And like, I'm not going to be too high on any of these albums, to be honest. And that's not really a knock on post rock. I love some post rock. I think there are better post rock artists out there. Like, I love Explosions in the Sky, but I feel like a 70-minute album is not a great vessel to enjoy this sort of music. It's too tough. You really have to be like once in a year, totally meditative toward it, sucked in. You have to control your whole environment to really dive in here. It's not like you can just go down. Like for me, I take the train to work. You can't really listen to this on the train while you're getting up and moving and getting off stops and walking to work. It's tough. It's not that accessible. That said, I do like the style and some moments of it, but in the album format, which is what we're reviewing, it's not going to be a pretty show, folks.
Yeah. Well, we're all in agreement on the bottom. I also have one, but I disliked it even more than you guys. To me, this was my least favorite thing we've ever listened to for the channel. I absolutely cannot stand it. It's like the equivalent of an all-white painting. And I've taken enough art classes to understand like the meaning is in the doing and all that. And I just have no patience for it. I don't want to listen to it. All the ambient wind noises and the shakers, and I get no enjoyment from it. And it actually gives me anxiety. Like when music stays on like one tone or like one chord and just hangs there forever and ever and never moves anywhere. For some, it puts them in this like peaceful meditative place. It drives me absolutely insane. I just need it to go somewhere. I need it to do something. And yeah, it just really drove me up a wall. I hated listening to this. It's 0 stars. Just pointless. Absolutely nonsense. Really bad. Hated it. But I don't hate all Sigur Rós. There's albums I like, so don't worry.
All right, here's another album I did not like, but I did like it slightly more than Vaughn. It's another V album. I got Valtari, means steamroller. This one, it's definitely more interesting and more things happen than on Vaughn, but it has even fewer highlights to me. This is one where I frequently forgot that I was listening to music, and like answering emails and searching Yahoo felt like super epic at times. May have listened to it twice in a row. It's very hard to tell because none of the songs have any differentiating features, and there's really no beginning or end. It just sort of goes on looping forever and just boringness. So 2 stars for Valtari. It's pleasant background music, but that is all it is.
I'm with you. I've got Valtari at number 7. 2 things real quick. Did you actually say Yahoo? Who searches on Yahoo?
I still have a Yahoo homepage, actually.
Good man. And what's with that tiny guitar in your background? Did you have Ed Sheeran over later or earlier? What's going on? Anyway, Valtari, I've got at 2 stars. Number 7, it takes a step back to their roots after doing that kind of indie folk album before it. Big soundscapes, waves of emotion. I like Egg Onda. It's lush and transcendent. Kind of sounded like the theme to Braveheart to me. R.I.P. James Horner. Eki Muck, who sounds like a pretty good defenseman in the NHL, has a nice brittle softness, which is lovely. Great sonic textures on Varud, and I love the piano. But the problem with this album is like when they finally stepped out of their comfort zone, they just went right back to it. And this album is just, it's well done and it's polished, but it's too basic even for them. So just 2 stars. Number 7, Valtari.
Can we run the table? A complete list trifecta. I also have Valtari at number 7. And I think throughout their catalog, they seem to be a band that kind of like react to their own records. They seem to like whatever they did before, they want to do something different on the next one. And so they were kind of going in this more like indie folk direction, like Cram kind of touched on. So this feels like a reaction to that. Like they're not going to do that again. They're going to go back towards this sort of spacey, ambient texture type of sound. And I don't know, like I think It kind of works in places here. It's very slow moving. It's kind of like a glacial record. I think Yonsi's voice is very, pretty. I love his voice actually. And I think that's one of the strengths of the band. I like how present it is on this record. He's giving like these almost operatic performances at times. I think the music is gorgeous throughout most of the record. Even though it is slow and there's not a lot going on, I think it's a very pretty record. But then you get to the last two tracks, the title track and Fozier Piano. And to me, those two just torpedo the record. It's like going back to Vaughn, where like really they're just like hanging in one place way, way, way too long. It's really just aggravating, drives me insane. It's basically 15 minutes of nothingness. It's tacked on to the end of the record. I think I probably would have gone 3 stars, but I'm at 1.5 stars because I think those songs are awful. So yeah, pretty a nice, calm, reflective record until you get to the end, and then it just drones on and on.
Love, a minute ago when you said they hold a note way too long, you really channeled your Adam Duritz. Way, 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 way too long.
Okay. I don't think we're gonna go all the way with the same albums here. I think it stops now because I got Takk, which means thanks, as my number 6. This one feels like who they are as a band, like kind of distilled. Everything is just a building crescendo. Like every single song, from the opening moments of Glissoli, like it sounds like it should be a commercial for environmentally friendly outdoor wear or something. Like everything is like a sweeping vista landscape shot or like rolling fields of corn or something. It doesn't feel like music to me. Like it just feels like filler and background music for like some picture that I should be seeing. And maybe that's what it's supposed to be. Maybe it's supposed to be like you hear the music and in your mind you're imagining like a big mountain with some trees and a really epic looking lake. And I think of like Vancouver and like really exotic, kind of far off places, usually cold places. I always get Arctic feelings, probably because they're from Iceland. But fjords and forests and stuff like that, alpine hills, whatever. And it gets really old really fast when you're listening to all these albums back to back. I feel like I could have liked this band if it had been like one-offs, but just the cumulative effect of just listening to these albums back to back to back, and just everything is just like slow tension build and build, and usually there's a release at the end, sometimes there's not, but it still feels like it's the same like playbook for every single track on a lot of these albums. Not all of them, there's a couple I think that break the mold well, but I don't like Jonesy's voice. I think it's way too precious for me. It's way too like 90s, late 90s, early 2000s indie preciousness. I don't think the arrangements are that interesting. The whole violin playing a guitar, like that's cool at first, and I just don't think they vary it nearly enough, especially on these earlier records after Vaughn. And I don't know, it feels pretentious, but also really boring, which is very hard to pull off. Like it just, like I like my pretentious music, like Muse, where like there's just stuff happening, and it's just crazy, guitar heroics and synth stuff. Like this build, this rolling. It's like every song they do is a boring version of Exit Music by Radiohead. So yeah, the BBC used this a bunch in Planet Earth series. It was like backing music for soccer and F1 events, and like that's what it feels like to me, and that has a great place for it in those applications. But to me, just very much background music. So I got it 2.5 stars for Takk from 2005.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's all the same formula. 90% of it is a 7-minute song. It's a tea kettle. It slowly boils, and then the cymbals come crashing in, and it swirls around, and then it calms down again. And It's just what they do with everything most of the time. But my number 6 is the newest one, Atta. And yeah, like that's my review. It's a typical AI chat GPT, like robotic, what you expect the Sigur Rós album to be. The synths, the keys, the strings, they all sound really good. This might be their best sounding record overall, but it's a very safe comeback. The one they did 10 years before this, Kviker, was a really different move for them, which they badly needed to do. And this one is just a better sounding version of 4 other albums they did. There's not a lot to grab onto. I do like the track Kletcher, which is unnerving at first and then has a nice ray of light. Overall, just like it's exactly what I expect. Like you can just fast forward through all of these tracks and not really miss anything because it's just like Jason said, everything just hangs there and you get it and you understand it. But like unless you're really in a like need to just escape your reality and pretend like you're looking at the Arctic Ocean for 75 straight minutes, which is something I might need to do once a year. But, for a channel that's primarily rock and pop album reviews, this ain't cutting it for me. 2 stars.
Atta is my number 6 as well. So Cram and I have the same bottom 3. I'm not sure that that'll last much longer, but we'll see. And yeah, for a decade between records, it feels like kind of a letdown, like kind of anticlimactic. This one was recorded with the London Contemporary Orchestra at Abbey Road Studios. And Cram's right, it is a really, really well recorded record. It sounds incredible. That room there at Abbey Road sounds so good, especially for like this type of orchestration. So on a technical level, on a recording level, and like engineering, it sounds fantastic. I think it's phenomenally well executed in that regard. But it kind of just feels like a film score. And in kind of the same way, like you use a score in film to kind of enhance the emotion. And that's what this feels like, manufactured emotionality to me. Like, what is Sigur Rós doing on this record other than string swells? And I don't think they're doing a whole lot. I don't think there's much in the way of the songwriting here. Maybe understanding the lyrics would change my mind on that a little, but it doesn't feel that way. So I don't know. For me, it's kind of like very pretty, sounds very good, but it's also kind of empty. So 2.5 stars for Atta for me.
Yeah, Atta's my 5, and it's at 2.5 stars. And yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I wrote music to watch, videos of wheat bending in the wind too. And that's all it is. Like I need something else. And it is even more disappointing when you go back to their last album before this, which had some new ideas and took seemingly taking the band in a different direction. And then they come back to this, just, this is what they can do in their sleep. They don't need to go to Abbey Road and they don't need an orchestra to accompany them. Like this is what they do. And the things that they do to enhance this album don't do anything. So yeah, no good. 2.5 stars.
All right. Damn, I didn't want to be the first one to have to bring this up because I don't know how to say it, but my number 5 is Miosio iram vio spilum endalast. Or with a buzz in our ears, we play endlessly. And again, endlessly, well said, Sigur Rós. I liked Gobbledygook a lot. Real cool guitar and pounding drums, cool rhythm. This is the album that feels more like a classic, ornate chamber music kind of indie folk album. The atmosphere and those deep, frosty Arctic textures aren't prevalent. There's more influence of classic song structure. It's not in English, so I can't really dive into that and enjoy that part of it. So the song Mio A the Iram is good. I like the drums a lot. The drums aren't really noticeable in this catalog. When they are, it really helps elevate the song, but they don't notice that that's one of their strengths in this entire 8 album catalog. If they did, we might have a little bit of a different story here. You get a song like Il Grassi is something that's kind of new for them, really minimal and just voice and acoustic guitar pretty much. That said, it still wasn't that amazing. So even though this is a really refreshing output and perspective on what they can be as a band, it's not new stuff to me. It's new stuff for them. And the drawback, like Joe was talking about, Jonesy having like more melody and more singing, like I can take some of just like the vocal like bellowing and like angelic moaning and stuff with the reverb. That sounds good. But when he kind of starts singing and tries to tell a story and has like that high pitched whimpering preciousness, yeah, I don't like it either. I actually really dislike the sound of his voice when he's singing. So there's a little more of that on here, and that doesn't help. Still 2 stars.
All right. Well, maybe I'm ultimately going to end up being the biggest Sigur Rós fan here, because at number 5, I go up to 3.5. I think everything else is at least good. So my number 5 at 3.5 stars is the Bracket album, parentheses, whatever you want to call it. 8 untitled tracks on this record. And to my knowledge, this album is also the one that has the first appearance of their made-up language, Hopelandic, which appears from time to time on their records, which is just kind of like a scat singing type of thing. They move on this record away from the kind of Radioheadness of the previous record, more to the sound of like what I think of as post-rock. It's closer to that. There's less song structure here. It feels like tons of space, tons of air between the notes, but you still have discernible chord progressions and melodies. Jonsi's voice on this record sounds a little more human too than it does. I think it's recorded a little drier. It's a little more upfront, not quite as otherworldly as it is on the previous record. I think this record is quite gorgeous. I think they're absolutely succeeding in achieving the sound they're going for here. It's very well produced, but at the same time, it doesn't entirely call me back to it. Post-rock, not really my thing. But at the same time, I love the sound. I think, if they had this exact sound, if this was like the sound of the band and they built in more traditional song structures and melodies, I think I'd be all over it, especially with Jonsi's voice, which I mentioned before that I like a lot, unlike you guys, apparently. Like, if their songwriting was like what I wanted all the time, I could see them being one of my favorite bands because I like his voice so much. And they will occasionally, once in a while, kind of dip their toes into those waters where they're like right in my wheelhouse, but usually they're just a little outside of it with all the post-rock stuff and that kind of thing. So 3.5 stars, kind of a low 3.5 on this one. But I like it. I think it's good. I think, what they do with sound and pacing and tempo and that kind of stuff is kind of cool. So yeah, not bad.
Right. My number 4 will ruffle some feathers. I got Ágætis. That's how you say it. Doesn't look like it. It looks like Ágætis Brygen, which is what I was calling it until I just looked it up on Google. This one, this is their big breakthrough, 1999. Everybody loves it. This is what post-rock blah is, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I thought it was pretty boring, and I was really disappointed with this whole discography and this band in general at how absolutely uninteresting and boring they were. I guess I had a different like concept of post-rock where I thought it'd be kind of weirder, but it is just so like, I don't know, right down the middle. Like this is like Enya, but like for hipsters. Like there's nothing interesting going on here at all. There's no, off the wall sound effects or like weird dissonance or anything. It's just a crescendo, a build. Every song is exactly the same. I hate his voice. Like I'm just gonna say it. I think he has one of the lamest voices that we've done. I hate everything about the band, but it's not unpleasant to listen to. So I didn't get to like knock it quite down as low as I'd like to. I mean, it's pretty, but so is Enya. I don't know. It's just none of these things were what I was expecting at all. Even, compared to somebody like Takk, and I think is what post-rock should be. This is just incredibly overblown, pretentious, and just the same thing over and over and over again. And I've already said that many times. I really liked what Robert Christgau said about the album, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. I should have just read it as my review. He gave it a B. It was also his least favorite album of the month. He said shamelessly tear-stained epics in the falsetto cadence of angels to turn 4 AD styled sepia-toned instrumental passages into awe-inspiring new religious mantras. That actually might be what Jonesy said about it. I'm not sure. It's in quotes, but yeah, I don't know. I just don't like anything about it. I don't know if he said you have to admit I'm smarter than Enya, but that's what Robert Christgau said that he said. And about that, he was certainly right.
Yeah, I mean, in defense of post rock, I think Sigur Rós really leans more into the synth landscape of ambiance. Like, I love bands that kind of do that style, the cinematic soundscapes, but they do it with rock instruments like Mogwai, Explosions in the Sky. I really dig that. Like, they have a more like film score kind of approach, but they do it with that rather than just being like, like cool, dude. Like, so that was what I really was disappointed with this band. And they did have moments, especially when they bring in some more of like the chamber music kind of like it's not a total lost cause, but I was very disappointed. My number 4 is Takk. I'm up to 2.5, but still, like, you get a song like Gladioli, as basic as like their formula gets. There's nice vocals, I guess, because he's not singing, he's just howling. Hopi Pola has nice keys, cool twisted keys, catchy little riff, good harmonies. But like, you get these little pieces of music that you like, and they're just going for 3.5 minutes. You're like, okay, I get it. Like, what if the intro to Over the Hills and Far Away was that awesome acoustic part? But they did it for 38 bars, like before like Robert Plant came in and be like, okay, I get it. Like, it just makes no sense. It's just poor editing, to be honest. I do think on this album, like, the drum work kind of stands out for me, which is why I went up to 2.5. I like the song Celeste a lot. Has a cool tonal shift, becoming a bit of like chamber music fanfare in the back half, nice and whimsical. Some good piano on the album. You get more ambient stuff like Milano, which has some nice vocals. Gong is really cool, great percussion. But like Endivari is quite bland. And by this point, what is this, their third, fourth album? I'm just thinking, like, how do they pump out music? Like, do they get on the phone and be like, "Hey, I got some great new ideas for an album. We gotta start recording." It's like, what were your ideas? Like, what did you need to get down? like instead of holding this keyboard synth part like this, let's do it like this, and then we'll put a bell on this beat instead of that one. Like, that's it. I don't get it. I was pretty bored. Joe said it. The word is bored. I was bored.
All right. My number 4 is also Takk. This one's a little bit heavier. It's a little more rhythmic, a little more percussion on this record. It's a bit more grounded and kind of earthier than Bracket's spacey and floaty nature. I think that all the drumming on this record helps to propel the songs. It gives it a sense of movement. They don't feel like they're just hanging in the air, which I think helps it. There's also some lovely strings and orchestration on this record, which is, I think, very magical on the track Happy Pola. And Vari, I think, is a really lovely ballad with some great vocals. But that's what's missing most for me here. I could use a whole lot more Ionzi on this record. On most of the record, he's using his voice as more of like a keyboard pad, where he's just like layering vocals as sound more so than like singing melodies. And I would just prefer him take a stronger melodic stance. My other criticism of this record is that I think the buildups could have been finessed a little more. And I think this is what Joe is really alluding to when he was talking about this record. You know, on the song Glossoli, I think that's a good example of what I'm talking about. It's just kind of like this pounding rhythm, like this big crescendo, but it's not that interesting. It's just like, it's kind of like what Coldplay does on Politic, where it's just that constant like dun 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 dun, and it's like, okay, you've reached the peak. Let's go somewhere. Let's do something else. And it just never really does. So I don't know. This record, I think it's a little bit better than Bracket because of the rhythmic stuff. It kind of has more of a flow to it. It pushes along a little further. It feels like it's going somewhere. But at the same time, I just want a little bit more melodically, and I think they could finesse things a little bit more musically at times. I still think it's good. I enjoyed listening to it. I'm at 3.5 stars, but again, kind of like a lower 3.5 on this one.
All right. Whatever that last one's called. Ágætis Byron. 2.5 stars for that one. I'm gonna go up to 3 for the old Bracket album. I think, I don't know, this one, maybe it's just that it gets better at the end. My favorite couple tracks are Untitled 7 and Untitled 8. So it kind of leaves me with a nice taste in my mouth there. It's pretty much the same as the last ones. I don't know how to differentiate them because there's really nothing to differentiate. Like, it's the same singing, it's the same crescendos, the same builds. I think they're using mostly the same instrumentation. There's a glockenspiel on this one, so that's cool. They use an ebow on the bass on Untitled 6, subtitle ebow. That's how you know it uses an ebow. Untitled 3, very soundtrack music-y, just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. Mood stands in for songwriting for the most part. And I guess it's Untitled 3 has a very elementary piano line that just repeats forever. Sometimes it goes up an octave. And then finally they drop in this pretty cool sounding raging violin guitar stuff. And that's cool, but it's 6 minutes to get there, and it's just not worth it. The juice ain't worth the squeeze. All right. So Untitled 4 is pretty nice. I will give some love for that one. It feels chilly, feels like a burning candle on a chilly Christmas day, maybe, which is cool. You get the warmth and the cold all at once. So that's nice. But I think mostly it's emotionally manipulative music. And one of you may have already, I think Krams already said that. Or maybe it was Jason. It's like watching an infomercial, with Sarah McLachlan, and the dogs are in bad shape, and there's 3 legs and one doesn't have an eye. And there just doesn't feel like there's any depth behind the pretty sounds. They are very pretty sounds. I think Jonesy's a little less annoying on here. But man, it just feels like it should be in a movie trailer for something heartwarming or tear-inducing, and not just something you listen to, because it just doesn't have the diversity and enough interesting ideas to make me care about it. So, it's 3 stars, but I don't particularly like my 3-star albums that much. So I give them props because all their albums sound really well done. They're excellently produced and excellently put together, but that's as much nice stuff as I can say about them.
I don't deserve much more than that. It's also my number 3. Now, I'm the pretentious one on the channel, but man, I could not stand that this album was just a parentheses and 8 songs called Untitled that all have their own subtitle. Just call them what they're fucking called. It was cool. Whoever was the first artist to come up with an untitled song, maybe a few here and there. You come across it sometime. You're like, okay, but 8 of them when you're just going to title them anyway. Come on, man. That's really stupid. First one, Yaka, cool piano, interesting whimpering vocal swirling about. So that production was cool. Creates this distorted childlike wonder. Untitled 2 is an incredibly big yawn. 3 is likable. Yeah, I am really sad that these reviews we're doing feel like a Sigur Rós album, because we're just doing the same thing over and over, like just saying the same things. It sounds nice, it's pretty, but there's no depth and it's kind of boring. Like the sensations are bittersweet and hopeful and uplifting, and they all have this big dramatic feeling like something terrible will happen, but it's going to be all right, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and the big ray of heavenly sunshine coming in while like the world is burning. It's going to be okay. The Ebo in number 8, or the number 8 Ebo with the Ebo on the bass is cool. Good drum work on there too. But like, you know, Hopelandic, I didn't know it was Hopelandic. I read it. I can't understand, the original language they're singing in. So the fact they made up another one doesn't really affect me. But just knowing they made up a language, it really pisses me off. Anyway, it's my number 3.
I feel like Cram's getting more negative as the video goes on, as opposed to the other way. All right. So my last 2 are kind of like low 3.5s. My next couple are like pretty strong 3.5s that are inching their way towards 4. My number 3 is Ágætis Brian. No, but whatever. That's as close as I'm getting. Possibly the biggest improvement between 2 albums ever of all time. From the absolutely unlistenable Vaughn to what I think is a very good record. This is kind of like, I don't know, if Kid A took Radiohead's sound too far into electronic textures for you, this may be like the follow-up to OK Computer that you were looking for. I think it's a cool record. It's really atmospheric and textured in a very organic and natural way. There's a lot more singing on this compared to a lot of their records. There's maybe 1 or 2 more that has like more traditional melodies than this one. But in the scheme of their catalog, I think this is one of the more melodic efforts. As I've said several times already, Jónsi's voice is one of their biggest strengths, and I think it is highlighted here pretty well when oftentimes it's not utilized enough. I like Sven Englar. It has that kind of great underwater sonar sound and that gorgeous melody that he's singing. The inspirational strings on Stralfer, I think, are great, kind of triumphant, sort of like pre-Coldplay in its epic emotionality. And even without any understanding of the lyrics here, I think the whole album is pretty stirring. It's not a perfect album. There's other tracks that don't quite work. There's the song, I have no idea how to say this, Harto Harmast, which has like that electric piano kind of bluesy feel, doesn't work that well. It's kind of a weird track for them to do. That one doesn't work too well. Kind of takes you out of the ethereal nature of the rest of the record. And the 10-minute Virar Vel till Walafstra, I think that one is lovely. It's well composed, but maybe it takes a bit too long to get where it's going. But then at the end, I think the title track is pretty strong. There's some cool, weird chord changes on that track. So I think it's a pretty strong record, maybe a little front-loaded, but I think, compared to the debut, I think it's phenomenal. And I don't know. I like that it's a little more song-centric. I like the vocals on it a lot. I like what they're doing musically, arrangement-wise around the vocals. Yeah, I think it's cool. 3.5.
All right. Number 2 is going to be... Can you hear that? I don't know how to say it. The one with the naked guys and chicks on it. This one at least changes up the template. It busts out of that like big slow crescendo build stuff into things that actually sound like songs. Gobbledygook, got some actual guitar that you can like hear right off the bat. Kind of an old-fashioned folky feel to it. Got some clomping drums. The singing isn't nearly as precious. Doesn't rely on the usual tricks. And maybe it's like, Stockholm syndrome. And this was the one that was like, oh my God, something new. I love it. But it feels kind of like they're just going for like an indie rock feel, little Arcade Fire, perhaps. And you hear that kind of throughout the whole album. Track number 2, Inimer Singer, Viddle Singer, some hard words to pronounce. You got some of those like indie sounding aught horns like popping in, which is nice. Some strings that aren't like what they were doing before with strings, the indie sounding strings. The stuff you hear in folk songs and the indie folk from the 2000s. And it's not, revelatory or anything like that, but after everything that came before it, it actually does sound kind of like just like, a light in the darkness, clearing in the forest, just something new and different. And I think they pull it off pretty well. And it's not like I think they're a bad band. I just don't like any of their ideas. But when they change their ideas to something like this, I think they play it very well. Ilagressi has some real nice acoustic guitar, a really minimalist piece, which is like manna from heaven after all the maximalism. I think the worst track on here is the English one. All right at the very end, just kind of boring. And I believe this one was supposed to be in English. They translated it to English and then they translated it back into Icelandic or Hopelandic, or maybe a little of both, to get like even like weird kind of meanings, like you're playing with like Google Translate and like translating things back and forth until it becomes weird, which is cool. And I don't mind the Icelandic at all. I I like foreign, languages in songs. That doesn't bother me a bit. It's usually just the music that kind of irritates me. But I think on here they find something new and different, and it all kind of works for them. It's not great, like it's not album of the year material, but it's certainly pleasant. And I'm up to 3.5 stars for that one.
Question: does that make it your favorite Flood produced record? It might.
Was it produced by Flood?
Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
Ooh, Joe likes Flood. It took an Icelandic post-rock band for him to fall in love with Flood. My number 2 is, I guess, Beatrum, their second album. Still only at 2.5. You get Svefn G. Englar. Pretty good. It's from Vanilla Sky. We really should rank Cameron Crowe's films sometime. I like the bow guitar. I like the work there. I kind of like the drowsy drum playing on this album. The strings in general are very nice. They do strings really well. I'll give them that. There's nice little like lead work with like bell like synths and xylophone, glockenspiels, whatever. You get Flugufrezlaren is kind of cool and jazzy. So compared to the first album, they're really rounding out their sound more, putting more emphasis on mood and like emotions, emotive changes. I just hate the lead vocals. I'm with Joe. One of my least favorite singers we've ever covered on the channel. I do not like the sound of that voice at all. Sounds like Tweety Bird trying to be punk or something. I don't know. It's just not working for me. We get some nice like ornate chamber music kind of, and I know it's not called New York Battery, but and Nai Battery or whatever, but Hjardo Hamast is cool, kind of mysterious. So, there's a lot more variety on here than compared to the debut. Is it one of the best jumps from a debut to a second album ever? No, Jason's absolutely insane. Like the first one is not that. It's not a 0, and this one's definitely not a 4 or whatever. There's some good piano on the album. But like I said before, you can predict the whole ride 30 seconds in. You can say, all right, 4 minute mark, it's going to really swell up, and then everything's going to crash, and it's going to swirl about into this big soundscape, noise rock for a little bit, and then it's going to calm after the storm. That's it. Do we all have the same number 1?
I want to flip my top 2 so we can have a trifecta, but I got to stick with my original ranking. My number 2 is Kveikr. I don't know. This one's pretty cool, though. Probably their darkest and heaviest record. Once again, going in the opposite direction of the record that preceded it with Valtari. Brennestein is like almost industrial sounding. That bass is by far the heaviest thing in their entire discography. Really cool. Along with Takk, I think this is probably the most rhythmically driven album. Maybe even more so this one. There's some really cool melodies on this. Like even though it's kind of like heavier and dark, I think song wise, I think there's some pretty good songs here. Ishyak, I think, is like downright catchy, like almost a pop song. The drum part on that song is really cool too, and the strings at the end are really interesting. And I like how structured this one feels in comparison to its predecessor, and then in comparison to a lot of their catalog. I think having that framework of song structure just allows for the melodies to really take hold, and then in turn that allows them to highlight Yonsei as a singer. And I just think, having more traditional song structure seems to work for my taste, at least. Stormer, I think, is great with its like heavy beat and toy piano on top of that, kind of brightening everything up. They do that a decent amount where they have kind of like the steady, heavy, pulsing beat going on with the kind of like toy piano sound just kind of like twinkling away on top of it. And they sound like a rock band on Rafstremnur. So yeah, this one's pretty cool. I don't think this one is highly thought of among their fans. I'm not sure. But yeah, I was surprised at how much I liked this one, especially after Valtari, and did not expect. I thought I was, going to be able to check out after that and and not care much. But this one's good. High 3.5 on the cusp of 4.
All right, my number 1, Havaikar, which is really the only interesting album I think in their whole discography. The Naked People one was decent, but I think it just skewed a little bit too close to like traditional indie rock kind of sound. I think Kavaikar it really sounds like something different. Like it sounds like nothing I've really heard before, and the mix of those different genres, the post rock, like hard rock and some industrial, and just it felt more like what I was thinking this band would sound like, what post rock would be like. And it completely, maybe not completely, but mostly breaks out of that just like the Sigur Rós template of all those builds and crescendos and sort of film score sounding thing. Like this sounds like actual songs, like they were trying to write real pieces of music and not a soundtrack to some inspirational Google product launch or something. Brennestein, like it kind of like squall of feedback in the intro, and that bass is great. It's almost like insect-like the way it sounds, very aggressive, dirtier and uglier, and things shift around a lot more. You get some unexpected things coming in, which is not what you expect from a band who had proven for like 5 albums that they're not going to bring in anything new or interesting or different at all. You got some like big tribal drums. I thought the drums on this album in general were pretty good, the strongest in their catalog. Stormer, great stomping beat. Title track rocks, like it legitimately feels like a rock song. And yeah, in general, it just felt like an interesting album. This is what you'd expect from an Icelandic rock band, like something weird and icy and cold and kind of like brutal, like a Viking warship or something. It just felt like Icelandic rock and not the soundtrack to a fjord. So I was flirting with giving it 4 stars. I don't think I am, because I don't think they've earned 4 stars, making me listen to all these albums. So I'm going to go with a high 3.5 stars. I can't say definitively I'll never give it 4 stars, but for the purpose of this album listography, I'm just going to go 3.5, topping out. And this is probably the least favorite discography we've ever done. I really had to split hairs. Maybe better than Three Dog Night.
Yeah, it's my number 1, Kavaikar. And I can't remember the last time Joe and I lined up so much. Our albums weren't exactly on the same page, but I've got this at 3 stars, which is like your 3.5. and I'm close to 3.5, and you're close to 4. And yeah, this album just kind of rocks a little bit, which is really nice. It's darker and denser than anything they've done. You get that right off the bat with Breinenstein. There's a bit of evil in the noise on this one. Hraftina, nice, pretty nice. And Izjaka is powerful and pumps you up while being pretty. And there's even a pulse to this album. Like there's some like more traditional rock drumming a little bit. There's some cool like pretty quick double time hi-hat work that's a little slippery and pretty tight. Yerfa board I like, and they're doing this more rockish, louder, more venomous kind of style while still keeping like that elegance to it. Stormier, really good drums. The title track is pretty epic. There's just more life to this album. There's more to grab onto. It's a celebration of their sound. They aren't drowning in it. They're not spreading it out too thin. Yeah, I like this album the most because it has the most variety. Like you go song to song and they feel different. Like one will be upbeat and like bombastic, and then something will be mid tempo, and then something will be a little more downtrodden, and then something will be all over the place. Just, and I think, like I said before, one of the things they did not utilize is just more percussion, or at least more change and more creativity with percussion. The music, like their stuff is so passive, and this album comes at you, which is totally different than all the other albums. And that's why I like it. And it's the only album I like by them. 3 stars. I like it. It is the best Sigur Rós album.
All right. My number 1 is the one with the naked people on it, the one that was produced by Flood. And this album starts awesome. I think the first few tracks, I think, are doing everything that I've been hoping for them to do the entire time listening to the previous records. It's almost like singer-songwriterly, but it's still retaining that kind of interesting sonic landscapes that they do so well. Like Joe said, it was originally intended to be in English, but then they switched it back. Any Mer Singer, Vital Singer, I think is a fantastic song, joyous indie pop. It sounds like the way that the album cover looks. And the next track, Go On Dagen, I think it's like this downright folky song with an acoustic guitar, which I don't know that I noticed much acoustic guitar in any other previous work. And I think it's just a lovely tune. I love hearing his voice just kind of naked and unadorned like it is on that track. Viospilum Endlast, I think is another incredible kind of indie pop gem. And as a trifecta of tunes, those 3 songs in a row, probably the most consistently engaged I was through the entire catalog. I think those songs just kind of really held me. I think the record after that starts to get a little moodier, but I still like the production, especially like the vocals and the way they're handled throughout the recording. There's another acoustic guitar that turns up on Il Greci. The record's a lot less spacey, less ethereal, but it still kind of puts this dreamlike haze around these more, traditional earthbound kind of sounds. So for me, I'm going a light 4 stars on this one, but did get to 4 stars. I think it's a very good record. As far as Joe saying it was the worst we've ever done, this discography didn't really like inspire great excitement for me, but it's far from the worst we've done. There's probably 20 or 30 artists that I like less than Sigur Rós that we've covered. So kind of like not my favorite, but I have no real issue with it.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with them either. In fact, I like them more than my album scores lead on. I just don't think they're a good albums band.
All right, so fair enough. We gave them a shot. We listened to all the records. This is what happens sometimes. We let the people choose. We put up polls, and this one is from our Patreon. So always interesting to check out a new band and see what we think, but sorry to those who aren't part of the voting and weren't aware of what they were getting into when they clicked on this video. But let us know what you think of Sigur Rós. Drop it down in the comments, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you get notified when all the new videos are coming out. And if you'd like to join the Patreon so that you can vote on upcoming artists, you can do that. The link is in the video description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.